here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of Derek Shulman, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Also, his time in the band Gentle Giant, which was from the 60s throughout the 70s and early 80s. They have a new live album that is just coming out, Playing the Fool, the complete live experience. Plus, we talk about that period and also what happens next to a musician and basically his life in music in lots of different ways and different companies. But you'll find out all about that and much more in this fascinating interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject that was the early formative years. Derek, it's over to you.
My personal music awakening was
yes,
the Beatles.
What sort of happened? Because you were born, I think it was towards the late 60s, wasn't it? No, late 40s.
Well, I wish it had been late 60s. I mean, that would have very been a pleasant surprise, now. But no, I was born. I'm post-war. Let's put it that way. Yeah. But so my real music awakening, if you like, was the Beatles. I mean, when I heard "Love Me Do" on the radio, it changed everything. I mean, that's if you want to, get back into the reality, and it changed everything in culture and in music and everyone else. I mean, who was involved in the UK at that point. I mean, they really did change everything. But that being said. I was already playing music, even as a kid, because my family was a very musical family. So, but certainly the Beatles across the board changed everything for I think most people in Britain at that time.
Yes, because I know you're probably the same age as Bowie and also Lemmy from Motorhead. And they used to always say, that musical moment was Little Richard and Elvis and then Buddy Holly. Did those people come on your radar at all at a younger age?
Not so much. Well, yeah, I love Buddy Holly, but to tell you the truth, what I used to do, and my friends from school used to listen to Radio Luxembourg and American Forces Network, and we used to love listening to blues music and R&B and Motown and chess. That was never played in the UK, but was played on these pirate ships, and that was like my background, and we used to listen to that stuff. And when I got my first guitar, I was able to play E, A, and B, and try to emulate Howlin' Wolf and Sonny Boy Williamson and Muddy Waters and then with the soul music of the time. So that was the first music that I really loved, and so did the Beatles, of course.
Yes.
They did the very same thing.
And was it sort of soul and Motown as well as R&B as well as?
Oh yeah. I mean, really great American soul blues music, if you like.
Yes. And when you would have been that age where you would have you were old enough to be aware of those kind of musical shifts from the early Beatles to the sort of 66, 67 period of the Summer of Love and psychedelia and the sort of counterculture and the hippie movement. Did you start to become quite excited or sort of tapping into that sort of world? Or were you sort of going on a different journey at that stage?
Well, I was in a group during that period of time. I started a group, my own group, in 1966. I was 65. I was just leaving school, and I got my a band from my schoolmates, and then my brother joined, my younger brother, and then my elder brother joined, and we called ourselves Simon Dupree and the Big Sound, and we toured, and we did very well actually in both UK and USA. I'm sorry, USA and Europe, and in 1967. In the summer of 1967, we had a pretty big hit called "Kites," which was, it was. It threw us into the big pop arena where we were playing Top of the Pops and 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 playing venues that were venues which are bigger, but not that much bigger, because we were popular as a band even then. But we were playing like R&B and blues music, but that pop big hit, kind of a psychedelic hit, became the kind of a milestone in our group's evolution, if you like.
Yes, well, absolutely. My God, that would have been very exciting at that point. Because yeah, it was kind of interesting. Because I know it's interesting. I was once, as I mentioned, and hopefully won't keep going on about David Bowie, but I remember him sort of talking about a particular band from, one of the members was from Scotland, a band called Clouds or 123, and there was the sort of, and this was like almost the beginning of prog rock. I remember thinking, God, I've got to the very beginning of prog rock, and the keyboard player was from Scotland. I remember him talking, and he sort of had one of those experiences in music where it wasn't going terribly well, and he smashed his equipment up, and that was the end of it, and went into another life of just just being, never played music. And then in the 90s, Bowie started talking about, Clouds, this 60s rock band, and his name was Billy Ritchie. I don't know if you remember them. Yes,
No.
and suddenly people started sort of getting in touch with him, and he went, God, why do people want to know me? And it was like, well, Bowie keeps talking about this band, and it was like the beginning of the prog rock movement almost. I was very excited when I did an interview with him. I thought, I've got to the source of this world of prog. So it was quite interesting at that stage. So yes, your musical moment in life was already, you weren't just a spectator, you were sort of already on the stage.
Absolutely right, and we learn how to entertain, if you like, and we learned how to, we were pretty big, actually, in the late '60s, and we played Europe, and we did all the rounds, and we had a very good following. But at the same time, the big hit became kind of a millstone around our necks. So we were growing musically, myself and my brothers, but we weren't able to sort of grow any further, because we were booked in these the championship circuit, as they used to call them, and where the audience would want the hits as opposed to what we wanted to do, which was a different kind of music. So the bottom line is that in 1969, around 69, we decided to break the band up and do something completely different, which we did, and we were lucky, in fact, that we had a almost a patron as a manager called Jerry Braun, and he saw in us that something that is my brothers and myself, that could be something interesting. And the world was changing in the late '60s, early '70s. Everything was changing, and people were doing things that no one knew what they were doing. So we again put the band that we were in before aside, and started this band called Gentle Giant. We had no idea what it was going to be. We recruited, the first member of the band was Kerry Monier, who just graduated from the Royal Academy of Music with a degree in composition and percussion, and he was a major influence in what we did. And then we recruited Gary Green, who was a real blueser. He was an amazing blues guitarist. And ultimately, we went through a couple of other drummers, but John Weathers, he was in the Grease Band and Piblocto, and we ended up with him as a drummer. But when you mentioned David Bowie, in our first couple of albums, Tony Visconti was our first producer. And
Yes.
when we were recording our first couple of albums, David Bowie, and T Rex we were all recording at the very same time with Tony. So we got to know, Tony, and we got to know, sorry, Bowie and his band, and T Rex, and we became kind of like almost a family in certain respects.
Well, I would imagine, actually. Yes, that was a very exciting time. But did you also, because did you leave school at 16 with don't worry, I've got another career plan? Or were you doing O levels at that stage, or had you
No,
already?
I was at grammar school, so I was doing A levels actually,
Right.
and in fact, at a place in university. But thankfully, we were the band. Simon Dupree were big enough to provided living for us. So we were able to do very, very well. Um,
Yes.
and just as aside, a bar that a lot of people know about, but I'll give you, the same old story that we were at towards the end of the band. Our keyboard player at the time got very ill, and we asked our manager at the time to find someone else to dep for him because we had a lot of touring, and a guy called Reg Dwight
Oh,
came to mind, and we met with Reg in Watford,
yes.
and he said, "I'd love to be, part of the band. What are you paying?" And I said, "Well, we could pay you 35, 40 pounds a week." And he said, "What? I'm getting £10 a week now. But I'd be happy to join you." So he became a kind of well, he was a member of the band, and in certain respects, um, he was kind of intrinsic in the fact that he was an incredible muso, and he knew that we were good musically, and he said, "Have you listened to bands like Spirit and Love over on the West Coast?" And we said, "No, not really." So he was kind of in a strange way helpful in the Simon Dupree becoming Gentle Giant, because he said, "You should try doing something different." And
Yes.
and uh, and in fact, he actually wanted to join the band, and he played his things like Skyline Pigeon, and me and Ray, my brother, who is now deceased, listened to it. We went back to Portsmouth where we were living, and said, "Well, Reg is a great guy, but this is not going to work." Thankfully for him, because the year after he became Elton John, and he was massive, and we were struggling to get gigs. So that's a story about that period of time. And Tony Visconti started producing our albums, and the first two albums he produced.
Right, my God, that's quite amazing, isn't it? Actually, at that point, yes.
Yeah.
And how did Glasgow shape you during the sort of your childhood? Was that quite an influential sort of background to your DNA?
Well, honestly, I was born in Glasgow, but I didn't see Glasgow that much. My family moved down to the south coast when I was 2.5 years old. So really, effectively, it wasn't something that I really remembered or knew about. My brother Phil, who was 10 years older, was in the band originally. Obviously, he was, and we lived in the grimmest tenement buildings that there were, ever. And so we knew we knew poverty very well, and that was not something that you want to remember or relish, if you like. So, in some respects, it was certainly part of my DNA, but I didn't see it on firsthand. I mean, my brother Phil did. So when we moved to Portsmouth, even though we lived in a couple of places which are kind of tiny, um, I didn't see the poverty of the tenement buildings where I was born.
Yes, God. Well,
Excuse
yes,
me.
there's quite a history to that area. And also, I mean, during that period of that sort of, obviously you had sort of was experienced in the 60s. How did it feel when suddenly you got to sort of 68, then 69, 70, and so many musicians were passing away, like, Joplin and Hendrix and Jim Morrison, Brian Jones had died. There would be, it had gone from sort of Peace and Love to Altamont and Charles Manson and music, and all these bands were starting to break up. Like, the Beatles must have been quite a moment for people having that band and those members there constantly, releasing albums to nothing to suddenly the 70s appear and sort of it's quite a different playing field. How did you cope kind of musically at that stage? Because obviously, a lot of people I've noticed have a zeitgeist moment and then a bit later they're not quite on that zeitgeist kind of vibe. I just wondered what it
Right.
was like for you.
Well,
Mm.
I mean, what honestly, when Hendrix died, it was devastating, because we actually, my first group, we played with Hendrix in several shows in Europe, and number one, he was such a sweetheart as a person, and number two, the band were just spectacular, not just good. The Jimi Hendrix experience where, I mean, we were really good, by the way, but they were incredible. And when he passed away, it was completely devastating to us, actually, honestly. But listen, what can we say? I and the band which we were in, Gentle Giant, eventually, we never really would. We'd never imbibe hardly ever in anything that would harm our ability to play and ability to do anything else other than being musicians. So in that respect, seeing seeing people that should have not. Oops, sorry, 1 second. I screwed up here. Oh, there you go. Sorry. Pass away when they should not have is awful, and we were very cognizant of that, and honestly, I have never ever taken a drug except way back. I smoked a joint or two, but even then, it was something I didn't enjoy because I felt a little out of control, and I don't like feeling that feeling, to be honest with you.
Yes, well, absolutely. And I mean, musically, things, again, start to change quite a lot. You had, I know they're not like you, but there was the Incredible String Band. There was another band called Comus. There was the Straubs happening. People were starting to experiment a lot more. And obviously, your sound is very kind of unique for 1970, isn't it? It's quite, there's nothing quite like it. Did you feel like you were on sort of quite a mission at this stage?
Well, we didn't know, actually, to tell you the truth, because as I said, we recruited musicians who were really, really good, and they pushed us as brothers to become better musicians and really kind of experiment doing different things. The truth be told, I mean, we didn't have any game plan. We didn't know. We didn't say, "Oh, let's be like this" or "let's be like that." We opened a book, and that was a blank page. So really, that's what Gentle Giant was about. I mean, and honestly, Tony Visconti was very helpful in the first album. I mean, he kind of helped shape the band's music into that first album. And as I said, we were there when Bowie was doing "Man Who Sold the World," and T Rex were doing that Bang a Gong and et cetera at the same time. So we were we our sound was basically the background of each individual member, bringing in their influences into what became Gentle Giant.
Yes, amazing. I mean, it was just a sort of kind of fascinating to see how things develop and how experimental people were during that period. And also, interesting enough, the cover was done by the one and only George Underwood, which was quite a nice little connection. Had you met George at this stage?
Well, yeah, we had, because he'd come in because Bowie was there and he was his best friend. And Tony Visconti introduced us, and he said, "Well, I'm an artist as well." I said, "Oh, good. We need a cover." And he said, "Well, okay, I'll try one out for you." And he came back a couple of days later, or whatever, it's a week later, and showed us this album, this cover with this giant and having the band in his hands. We thought, damn, this is great. I mean, so George got the gig and we became this Gentle Giant, and the face became enigmatic and had became the logo of Gentle Giant. So George Underwood, was introduced by Tony Visconti because David Bowie was in the same studio as him.
Yes, yes, and I think he had a mean right hook as well. So
We didn't know about that one, but we did
yes.
too. So
And what was it like, sort of
that's
touring
right.
at that stage? Did you sort of pick up an audience of very keen followers straight away?
Well, but what we did was it took about 6 or 7 months or 8 months to get together and start writing material. And luckily, as I said, we had someone who was able to finance the band, and that's something which is almost unheard of in today's marketplace. Um, and so we recorded with Tony and put the first album out, Gentle Giant, and then we went on tour. But the tours were sporadic, and we played crazy little places, and bigger places with different bands. I mean, some of the bands were really bizarre, but we toured and toured, and then we got our break, if you like, on this third album to tour Europe with Jethro Tull, and
Right.
that was a significant point of where we Gentle Giant became much more well known, and in fact broke areas in Europe in a very big way. Italy was a success, we became headliners there. We and Germany, and other and Scandinavia, and then we went over to the States, and we we were paired with the most, well, the management at the time then was a worldwide artist. We were paired with one of their biggest bands, Black Sabbath. So Gentle Giant with Black Sabbath on an American tour was one of the most bizarre pairings, if you like. However, we were really friends with Sabbath. We loved those guys, and
Yes.
we knew them because they were in the office. But it was the most bizarre tour to be on, and that was our first tour of America.
Right.
Um,
That's amazing.
so
Yes, I mean, I could imagine Jethro Tull, but Black Sabbath, but then, I suppose heavy metal was still in its infancy, as though no one wants to call it heavy metal, but then, they'd also were very, very prolific at that stage. So I don't
right.
know. And how did the American audience, I mean, it's interesting I think you mentioned Italy in Europe, because I've noticed with a lot of bands, when they do Europe, there'll be one country that really takes them. It could be Spain, could be,
Right.
Italy. Sometimes the German market kind of gets them. But
Yeah.
yeah, Italy definitely. It's interesting because there was a band in the 80s called Shelly Ann Orphan, and they found a very big audience in Italy, but could sort of almost play empty venues in other countries, I think. And also The Trees was another band, slightly more, I suppose, more sophisticated indie pop, with a certain musicality, which was quite unusual for bands at that time. So it's interesting that Italy also took you to heart as well. So
Yeah, yeah. That was the first really major market that we were. They really did. They took us to heart, and they really. After the Tull tour, we became headliners there. I mean, in big venues. I mean, almost arenas, and as well as Germany. Those two marketplaces were the ones that really took us under their wing, if you like, and we did really well in both those two marketplaces. And then we when we went over to North America, Canada became a really big market for us, especially French Canada, and then the sort of urban markets of North America, New York, Chicago, L.A., and various other places. But England was a strange one because we weren't. I don't know why we were kind of we did well in England, but we never kind of like were embraced by the press. And I think for whatever reason, because I'm looking back many decades later, because we're talking about the new album we have out, or the new remix.
yes.
Um, but I'm wondering, why it was that England press, and I think it was because that before we had Gentle Giant, we had this band called Simon Dupree, and we were a pop band, and we had pop hits. And it's almost like, how dare you, become a prog band when we know really underneath you're a pop band. So don't pretend you're something else. We kind of got that feel. It was almost like we had a badge around our neck saying "unclean" or something.
Right. It's interesting because obviously, I mean, I remember doing an interview with a journalist who was very rock and roll in the 70s and 80s, Nick Kent. And
Oh yeah,
when he started in, I suppose, the mid 70s, slightly before, he said it was quite strange because the journalists who were a bit more established were still waiting for the Beatles to reform. And he was thinking, no, they're not reforming. And what the kids want is something new. And it was like this pub rock, and then punk rock sort of appeared. So he was in the right place at the right time. And then obviously he's completely out of step during the 80s because he doesn't really understand the sort of the kind of the drive of a 16 to 18-year-old,
right.
which is fair enough. What were the kind of the publications that could been kind of on your side, so to speak? Because with a lot of the weeklies, they were a little bit, I don't know, they were a bit sort of gimmicky, not gimmicky, but they were quite ruthless, weren't they?
Yeah.
They would build bands up, they'd whack them down. Who was fashionable, who wasn't, all that kind of malarkey. What was the general, publications that you could have been a champion in?
Well, that's interesting. You should ask that. Well, sounds were always, very much on our side. Um, the melody maker kind of like were kind of there, where they were kind of in the middle, not sure whether they should give us plaudits or take us down. But the NME were absolutely like, really like vengeful, and really called us pretentious and twee and God knows what else. And we loved that, actually. To tell you the truth, we especially the pretentious thing, and we actually would occasionally, towards, in the middle of it, we'd actually have a flashing sign in our show called and it would say pretentious, because we laughed at it because it was so stupid, but nevertheless, to the NME readers, we were pretentious or twee or God knows what it was.
Yes, well, I sort of, I suppose I didn't appreciate it at the time, but looking back, how sort of, I don't know, weird the music journalists were, in a way. I wonder how many feel a bit guilty or a bit sort of
Well, it
embarrassed
doesn't
about.
matter. It doesn't matter, because here we are, how many decades later, and I'm still alive and I'm still breathing and I'm still able to talk about music, which is fantastic.
Yes, well, absolutely. And what was your, when you were doing the third album, which was one quite, oh yeah, Three Friends. So Tony Visconti isn't the producer on this. You decided to produce it yourselves. What was the
Right.
kind of reason for that? Were you sort of just feeling a little bit more kind of like you wanted more control, or how do you felt?
Yeah. Well, I think Tony he was an incredible mentor, really, and even on the second album, he was a mentor, but he stood back a little bit more. My brother Ray, was very much learn, to produce and to twiddle knobs and everything else, and so did Kerry and even myself, and all the band were, very much involved in their hands over the board, if you like. So when we did Three Friends, we decided to produce ourselves. And we From that moment on, we did until the end of the band, in 1980. But yeah, that was the first album we produced on our own. But we always had really good engineers next to us to make sure that we didn't go too far wrong with what we were doing. And in fact, I think
Oh, was
Martin
that
Rushent was the engineer, on that one.
right? Yes, because I know your brother Ray, having spoken to a lot of indie bands from the 80s, were produced by Ray, weren't they? So,
Yeah.
and they had a lovely story that his wife would pop out and go, "Oh yes, this sounds good," and it was almost a thumbs up. Um, it was like, "Oh God, yes, he did." That was like, yeah. So, our producer was a member of Gentle Giant. It's like fantastic, But they really enjoyed working with him and loved the studio and loved the fact his wife used to pop in and to say, "Yes, I think you've got it right this time. It sounds good." It was like the blessing from higher
Right.
beings. Which is like, did you find your fans though were part of that world of Yes, Genesis, Barclay James Harvest? Where there's a crossover that you were all? Did you feel part of a scene? That's what I was trying to say.
No, not at all. Actually, we didn't know there was a scene. Actually, as I said, we didn't live in London. We lived in Portsmouth. I mean, we when Gary and John and they lived in different places, but it all came down to Portsmouth. So we were a gang, and we were cocooned actually, and so it really made us very insular in a lot of ways, which I think helped in our creativity because we weren't aware of all these other bands that were, well, we were aware, but we didn't listen to all these other bands that were, I guess, bagged in the same mold as for the prog movement. We didn't know there was one. We just did what we did. So really, what we did was, as I said before, use our influences in music and composition to write and record, what was what was coming out of our musicality. And Carrie occasionally would score things, and so do we. We could read music as well as play, and we enjoyed doing different things as well. And we enjoyed using different instruments, which are, not the usual kinds of things. Carrie would drag in an old pipe organ or these, or what we Kerry was also very, incredibly versatile and played the xylophone and vibraphone, but we used old English instruments. And I played sax and bass, and Ray was able to play violin and trumpet. So we'd use all these things in our compositions and make the sound, I hope, different to most other
Yes.
bands.
And what was that process like when you went to record? I don't know if you saw that amazing Beatles film, only 8 hours, about their last album, where they sort of had to sort of book the studio and they had to do the album, and sort of just seeing how ideas came about, how they sort of turned up in the morning reading the papers and chatting about what they'd watched on telly and having cups of tea and having a fag, and then start trying to conjure up a sort of song. I just find that fascinating. I know I need to get out more. But how was your process of making music at this stage?
It was very different to that. We would usually Kerry and Ray were the main musical composers for the most part, about 80 to 90%. I'd come in with 10 to 15% of the music, and then we three would get together, and I'd provide the vocal line, and then the lyrics would I'd provide the lyrics, and then the band will come in, and we'd rehearse a piece of music, not songs, but I mean, we weren't three chords, and putting a vocal line and a chorus on top. So that was how we, as a band, put things together. So we didn't jam. I saw the Beatles documentary, and it was fascinating. But one thing we didn't do is sit around the studio and jam a couple of chords and then take a break and have a fag if you like and do this. We came in literally very rehearsed, very much knowing what we were going to do into the studio, and we didn't waste time. We were going for 10 years, but I think we put in 30 years worth of work in those 10 years. We were kind of a workaholic band, if you like.
Right. And on the lyric front, I mean, how did you start to sort of think? 'Cause it sounds like the music came first, then the lyrics.
Um, Both at the same, I mean, yes, to a degree, but at the same time. When Phil was in the band, my brother, elder brother Phil, he was very much influenced by literature. I mean, and whether it was something which is, again, on Octopus, the Gargantua Rabelaisian theme was part of it, and he loved that kind of thing. And Albert Camus and all these existentialist lyrical content.
Yes.
I was much more of a political writer and not political, but something which is happening today and to us and to whatever's happening in the moment. So we combined our efforts in both Three Friends and Octopus. But yeah, it was combined, and we got together, as I said, when Ray, Kerry, and myself, and when Ray, we kind of knew what the sound was looking for, and fitted the lyrics at the same time. It wasn't done after or before. They were literally so we had this amazing chemistry.
Yes.
So yeah, we really did, and it was something that you can only wish for once in a lifetime, if you like.
Yes, I sort of realised that it's a bit like the stars lining up with these things, and you can't somehow recreate it, but you might get close. But there's something quite unique about a band that creates, those pieces of work that we'll remember for the rest of life, really. It's quite interesting, isn't it? But ideas just happen, people sort of just come together for some brief moment in time. And yes, things do
Yeah.
happen at this stage. And also, it's with Octopus, this is your Roger Dean moment, isn't it?
Yeah, Roger. Yeah, we asked Roger. We had a couple of people that we asked to design our cover, and Roger, came up with this actually beautiful cover. And from what I know, Roger, and he said it's probably the best cover he ever did. But that's the only cover we had with Roger. And it was the octopus. Anyone who's seen it's the octopus in its full glory, if you like. Yeah, but in America we had a different cover, so, which is another story, of course.
Yes, this is always the way. And when you did In a Glass House, there'd been was it Is this the one? Oh, yes, Phil had left by then.
Right.
What was it
Right.
like for the band dealing with the sort of? Is this the kind of first time within the outfit that there'd been quite a shift in the sort of dynamics and personnel?
It was it was difficult, honestly, because not 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 for any reason other reason than he was my sibling. I mean, Ray and myself, he's the elder brother, but there was also the sibling rivalry, which is always ongoing with me and Phil. I mean, we were kind of like I was 10 years younger, and I was a singer. And so I got some of the spotlight. And of course, Phil being the eldest was kind of like we were kind of fighting to be the leader, if you like. And it's crazy to say this. And then when I reflect back on it, I'm thinking, what a stupid, but nevertheless, it was tougher for him than it was for me, because at the same time that we were doing things, and we were touring by then a great deal, he had a family, and it was tough for him to go on the road for literally weeks or months at a time with a family at home. So he left the band, and we were a five piece. And in fact, that was to make the album in a glass house was a kind of a dark period for us, but we decided to do it. And I didn't. I mean, it was a very weird time for us to do that album. On reflection and listening to it now and hearing it, um, it's really. I'm not saying this not to boast about it, but it's actually incredibly creative, and really, really probably one of our best albums, because we had to get down and say, okay, we're a different band now, so we have to do something very, very different, and that was almost a turning point in the band. Well,
Yes,
it
well,
was it was a turning point.
I guess it's that kind of the crossroads bit. But is it quite interesting when you find that some of the music that you've made have been sampled by various other artists decades later? Because I know I did an interview with a member of a band, I think they were called Section 25, and there was a very obscure track that got sort of sampled by, um, oh God, I can't remember his name. Is it Kay West? Kanye West, and it was a bit like,
Yeah,
how did he find this band? How did he find that track? And why did he sample this one little thing? But he did, and obviously it helped their pension plan. Did you have
absolutely.
you have you ever had those kind of moments as well where you're thinking, oh, that's nice of them, but how did they find us? And
Oh,
they
no,
live.
absolutely. In fact, we've embraced them.
Oh, I'd
And
imagine.
no, I embrace them because it's a really weird to say this, but I think that the hip hop world has embraced Gentle Giant in a really major way. I mean, we had a period of time. I think last year, a year before, we had three albums or our samples with number one, two, three on the charts. We had Tribe Called Quest. Run the Jewels had a gigantic record with a sample of Knots, and this year Travis Scott sampled Proclamation and opened the show with Proclamation. And it's just, and I went to see Travis and the band, or not the band, because they're not a band, it's
Yes.
him. But it's spectacular. It's great to hear 20 or 30,000 or more kids singing along, and they don't know where the hell that song came from.
No, they weren't
But
even born.
exactly that. But you know what? But I think in some respects, uh, some of these hip hop uh, artists are kind of like the new prog, because they twist and turn things and make things new out of something old. And I kind of admire some of that. I really do.
Yeah, well, I think it's amazing. Did you ever sort of say, look, by the way, I'm one of the members of that band, and that's part of my work. But how did you discover us? How did you have you ever found out how they managed to sort of go through the record label, the records, and go to G and think, yes, Gentle Giant, I must have a listen.
No, actually, I think for whatever reason, I think, and I'm going to say this out loud here. I was working. No, I was working with. As you know, I had a different. I was working with Hart and Alan Wilson, and I was talking backstage to a American TV show called The Tonight Show, and I don't know if you know who Questlove is and the Roots.
Yes.
Okay, so
Because I think Roots did a record with Elvis Costello, didn't they, a few years ago?
yeah, they did. Yeah. Anyway, the bottom line is they came out and they said, "Are you the Derek Shulman that was in Gentle?" I said, "Yeah." I mean, I was like, "What do you know about us?" And they came out the band, and it was almost like the I can't remember what the movie is, but we're not worthy. We're not worthy. To me,
Yes, Wayne's
we're
World.
asking for what? Your Wayne's World, yeah, exactly. And I was signing autographs for them, and it was so bizarre. And Questlove said, "You know what? You don't know. I don't know if you know this, but Gentle Giant has a ghetto pass. So we're, I guess we're okay in the hip hop world. So that's
Yes.
why there's been a lot of samples of Gentle Giant, and for whatever reason, they enjoy the music to twist around, and we enjoy hearing what they do. I mean, I think everyone enjoys it, not just for the occasional check or two, but just for the fact that they twist the music around, which is in a way that's very interesting.
Yeah, well, you never saw that one coming. And also, I don't
Not
think
at
they're,
all.
I'm sure there's a lot of bands, but there's not all bands have had that, the same thing. So it's interesting how they've tuned into your band so much. And
Yeah.
but then there's a lot of curiosity in your band, which is not very similar to anything else. You're quite unique, and I guess the uniqueness is what gives people a little bit of curiosity to delve deep and find more gems to sort of sample. I think it's genius, actually. I love it. I love
Yeah, I
those
do too.
stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you got to, yes, after that album and then, going through that process, which sounds quite emotional, did you then feel with the Power and the Glory, was that a little bit of a different energy with the band at this stage?
Oh yeah, yeah. We having gone through that sort of period, and then we toured. I mean, we toured a great deal, and we were becoming quite popular in both North America and in Europe. And the Power and the Glory was probably the easiest album we made. It came very naturally, and both lyrically and musically. And I think that it flows so well from the start to the end, and lyrically and musically, everything kind of fitted together. It's a I hate to use the word concept because it sounds like I'm pretentious and twee, which I probably was back in the day. Um, but no, it flowed really well, and that was the easiest album that we put together. We were a solid five-piece. It was much easier on stage to move around. There wasn't as much chaos, if you like, with a sibling rivalry, and it was we were doing really well as a live band.
Yes, and John Peel, the famous John Peel, who I adored, you did various sessions with him, didn't you, as
Oh
well?
yeah, yeah, a
Was that
great
at
deal. Yeah,
was that at Maida Vale Studios?
yes, it was exactly that.
Right. So this was, yeah, I mean, a Peel session felt like a bit of a bit of a blessing from someone up high, isn't it, really, at this stage? It must have been really, well, I don't know. I miss him so much, to be honest. So,
Yeah,
yes, he was a beacon. He was the curator, and he just seemed to be, even if that wasn't, like Bulgarian folk or African or reggae or dub, it's like, well, he felt like he'd played a lot, and he said, I think this is the best of that genre, and I think you might enjoy it, and I really just loved having that person doing that for me. It made
yeah,
life so
no,
much
no,
easier.
he was a real muso and understood whatever genre you're in, that understood who was the better players in whatever genre, whether it's punk or as you said, polka or whatever. You know.
Yeah. So did you? I mean, at that stage, this was kind of '76. You were doing it session. Had he been sort of a fan of the band from the beginning?
Um, yeah, well, not really. I mean, I think we did a lot of BBC sessions, and then I think toward when we were a kind of five-piece, I think that's when he glommed, if you like, glommed onto the band, and we did a lot of PL sessions, and we loved working at Maida Vale and did I think I don't know, 4 or 5 or maybe more of the Peel shows, and met him, and he was really gracious and really a great guy, and he loved the band, which is That was unusual in England because, again, we were still fighting sort of the trying to wipe off the symmetry-free image, even after 6, 7 years.
Yes, I guess these things do sort of linger in people's mind and consciousness. And then when you were, because a bit like Bowie, he did an album each year, and then he produced albums and did films. I mean, you're so prolific in the 70s. I mean, were you still was it Portsmouth that you were still living, and just
Uh,
literally getting up, working every day of the week, and then just thinking, right, that's another album, right? Wake up, that's another. Was it just one focus you had at this stage?
Absolutely correct. Yeah, no, that's exactly what we did. We tour, and then we came back from tour, and then we'd write and record, and then tour again. We as I said, we were kind of, I mean, in retrospect, we probably should have. We do, as I said before, we did 30 years worth of work in 10 years. We were prolific, and we did a lot. A lot of touring, a lot of recording, a lot of writing, in a fairly short period of time of the band. But yeah, that's exactly what we did because we were all in the same place in that period of time. Obviously, things happen afterwards that kind of like make it splinter, and you realize that's the reason why certain things didn't quite work out the way they used to. But
Ye-
nevertheless, at that point, we were certainly, again, a cocoon in Portsmouth.
Well, absolutely. I mean, was there much of a scene in Portsmouth at this stage?
Oh no, 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 we were the scene. No, it was the place we lived. That's something that's where we were, and yeah, we just rehearsed and wrote and our music in that area, and then we went to Ad Vision Studios for the most part, and recorded, as you said, The Power and the Glory, and then came Freehand, of course,
Yes.
and yeah, but that's what we did.
When you were getting to the end of the decade, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Things start changing quite a lot at this stage. Within the country, within fashion, politically, there was that sort of moment where, Margaret Thatcher gets into power, and the 80s appears, and we have the sort of Falkland War, and then we had the miners' crisis and Greenham Common. What's it like for the band at this stage? Because you did Giant for a Day. That was 78, wasn't it? And then that's
Yeah.
followed by Civilian, which is 1980. What's the state? Because you've done this is a good 10, probably, yeah, years. I know you had Simon Dupree, but then
Yeah.
what was the state of the band at this stage? Because by then, for the last album, did you go abroad to record that?
Yeah, well, the last album we recorded in LA, and that was my influence, if you like, because I went over there. At a certain point, but apart from recording and producing ourselves, we decided, me probably more so than anyone else, decided to manage the band because we had originally some managers who were basically gangsters and who managed Sabbath. It was they really were. And then we had another manager who ran Chrysalis, and then I decided to take it over. Again, in hindsight, probably the wrong decision, but nevertheless, because you get it wrong on both sides, and so you're not sure whether you're doing the right thing business wise or creative wise. But anyway, yeah, we did Giant for a Day, which was probably a mistake. And at that time, we started to move apart. We girlfriends would appear, and
Oh,
it's the
great!
same old.
The Spinal Tap moment.
100%, exactly what happened to the band. The Spinal Tap moment was right before, I guess, during Missing Piece, and then the missing the Spinal Tap album, if you like, was to a degree Giant for a Day. And then we tried to, I think, to make a commercial record, which didn't. Our fans, who at that time now were quite, we had a pretty big fan base live, didn't like that album and thought it was a sellout, if you like. And in certain respects, it was, nevertheless, it's some good stuff on it. But they didn't like it, and so we thought, okay, let's take a breather, which we did, and went to California to record Civilian. And what we did. there was, I went over to America because I was trying to sort of steer the band to make sure that we got airplay in America. 'Cause America is where the big money is, if you like, and we were actually fairly big in the US and Canada. So we all went over to LA and produced Civilian. Um, and honestly, I think it turned out really, really well. Actually, I got Jeff Emmerich, who was, believe it or not, the first ever engineer that my first band, Simon Dupree at Abbey Road, and my first single, he was the
Yes.
engineer there, and he was the engineer for Civilian in LA. And so we put that album together, and what we did was pare down some of the kind of like the quirky stuff that we were known for, I guess, and try to make it a little more accessible to a new audience. And I think it turned out really well, hoping that it would get on the radio in America. And it didn't.
Damn.
And so we yeah, exactly that. So we had a tour of America booked, and before the tour, I was actually married. I got married, and so again we had our Spinal Tap moments, and everyone else had their pairings of their girlfriends and or wives, and we were living in separate places by then. And so when Civilian didn't look like it was really catching on, even though I think it was a really good album and it should have, before the tour, we just said, I think this will be the last tour. And we toured America and did really well. But after the last show in LA, we all said goodbye to each other. And that was the end of that chapter.
Blimey, that was your Ziggy Stardust moment, wasn't it? God,
Yeah.
did it feel strange? Did you have that kind of awareness on that night that this was going to be the kind of end of the band?
No, it was really, we had quite joyful. It was a really joyful gig. It was fantastic. We had so much fun on that gig because we'd had 10 years of having a fantastic
Yes.
friendship and musical sort of helping each other and really being a real band as opposed to a bunch of musicians who got together. And so even though the tour, we knew there was going to be the end, it was a joyful tour. It was just very strange to say. And on the very last gig, we had so much fun. And literally after the show was done, everyone went home, and that's it. The door,
My God, that
the
was
chapter
it.
was closed.
So
Yeah.
then, how do you navigate the 80s, which is kind of the decade I love so much? Yes, what's your 80s then period like? Are you then staying in America and then sort of setting up a company there?
Yeah, I stayed in America, and Gary also did, because his wife is from America, and I wasn't, honestly, to be perfectly honest, I really wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. There was no plan A or plan B when we said we're going to end the band's career at the end of
Yes.
the tour. No one had anything sort of lined up, but we all knew that if we continued to do what we could have done, which is we could have done it for another 10, 15, 20 years. But what we didn't want to be is a parody of ourselves or become our own kind of tribute band. That's
Yes.
something that really was being an anathema to who we were. So no, there was no plan A or plan B, but I got a call from a friend that I knew from Chrysalis Records, who we were signed to in England, uh, in 81 or 82, beginning 82, and I was in LA, and he said, what are you up to? And I said, I'm doing bits and pieces, which I wasn't really. And he said, have you thought about, you know, being part of a record company? I said, absolutely not. I mean, that's the Darth Vader of that Luke Skywalker world.
The dark side.
The dark side, exactly. But nevertheless, he said, "Well, look, I'm at Polygram now, and we're putting this new department together. Why don't you come over to New York and meet the guys who's putting it together?" And I spoke to my wife, and she said, "Look, why not see what it is?" And I went to New York and was offered a job in at Polygram Records, and I joined the dark side, and I became Darth Vader
Okay.
myself.
Yes. So then you rose to the senior vice president, signing. Is this all true that you were the, yeah, the hair metal soundtrack of the 80s was kind of being channeled via you?
That's me. Yeah, my first signing was Bon Jovi, Cinderella, Kingdom Come, Men Without Hats. I signed a lot of pretty big bands at Polygram, Dan Reed Network, whether you know them or not, and brought in other bands from UK, Tears for Fears. So I had I guess I had some kind of not no, I had a good feel about who was authentic and who wasn't authentic, and could have a career rather than a one hit wonder. So
Yes.
I really found a new kind of like life and footing in a whole different world, which is, had I known, in certain respects, what it took to break a band while I was there at Polygram, um, I would have applied that knowledge to when I was in the band, because it wasn't the music business. I found out it was a business of music on the very first day, and I realized that literally on that day one.
Right. Yes. So, who was your manager for sort of Gentle Giant at during your, did you have various managers during the 70s?
Yeah, first manager who was very, very, I mean, incredibly helpful, and again, was, if it wasn't for him, I'm not sure if they would have been a Gentle Giant, was Jerry Braun. And Jerry again financed the band, and then Terry Ellis, who was owned Chrysalis Records and was the manager of Chester Toll. He became the manager for a period of time, and then Terry was involved in various. So we said, Terry, it's not working for us, and then I took over. And again, that's something, I guess, that knowledge, if you like, and sitting down with the agents and sitting down with other people in the business gave me some kind of background to where I went in the 80s, if you like.
Yes. So, because I think it was last year, I did an interview with Desmond Child, who'd got his book out, and he wrote some of those classic songs, didn't he, of Bon Jovi? Did you?
Yes, he
Was
did.
that cool? Were you part of that process of helping them do that, or was that something separate? You'd signed the band, and then it was up to them, or were you having meetings with them at this stage? I just wondered how things like that worked.
Oh, I listened. Well, I was working with Kiss at that time as
Oh yes,
well.
because he wrote some songs for them as well, didn't he? God, he wrote
Yeah,
a lot of songs.
exactly. But some of the songs, which I know the band. I could know the band very well, of course, because they were on the label. And I asked Gene. I mean, these couple of songs. I mean, I know you can't write the choruses like these. Who wrote them? Who is this guy's child? And he said it was a group called Desmond Child and Rouge at Capitol, and this guy Desmond Child is a really great writer. And I said, okay, well, introduce me. So he did, and I met Desmond, and I said, I've got this band Bon Jovi. They're starting to really happen, and I put Desmond together with John and Richie, and again, it was a marriage made in heaven, if you like, because they wrote, you know, the songs on "Slippery When Wet," and "You Give Love a Bad Name," and "Living on a Prayer," and et cetera, became
Yes.
the music of the '80s, if you like.
Yes, it crossed over everywhere, didn't it? From rock clubs to discos, didn't it? It was they were
Absolutely.
it was just you couldn't, every sound system had those particular tracks on it. Yeah, so you definitely had a, I mean, do you find it kind of strange that you had such a sort of awareness of what makes a good sort of metal rock band? Because your roster is extraordinary.
Um, Yeah, to a degree, yes, because that was a world. Well, we were a rock band in Gentle Giant, even though people think we're prog. We were a rock band. Listen to John Weathers playing. I mean, he's a rock drummer, man. I mean, he used to rock like hell, probably more than John Bonham, or just as well. I mean, should I say? I'd never say more.
Yeah.
Sorry about that slip. But no, like bands like Pantera, for instance, I signed, and I went down to see them when I was running Atco, and. I went down as a head of a company, and I was really aware of them because I got a tape of this band, and I thought they were incredible. I mean, even though they were very different to the music I had made, but nevertheless, uh, I just had a feeling about them. So I went down to this little club in Arlington, Texas, and within 3 songs, I wasn't just. It's hard to. It's so hard to express in words, but I went from being an observer to being an incredible fan immediately. And when I become a fan, not just a fan, I was absolutely taken with this amazing presence on stage and amazing musicianship. And I knew at that moment that they turned me into a fan. If they could turn me into a fan, and I almost jumped into the mosh pit, but I didn't. But thank God I did.
Yes.
But if they did that to me, they were going to do that to the world. And I signed them, and they did, in fact, put Cowboys from Hell out, and then Vulgar Display, and became incredible headliners and became leaders in the world. And that's the key to the bands that I've worked with. They weren't followers; they were pretty much leaders in their field, and that was very important.
Yes. Did you ever see that amazing documentary about Twisted Sister, who spent their whole 70s playing massive shows, but no one would sign them, and every record label, executive said, "Do not sign that band." And anybody who came and said, "I think we should sign them," is like, "Well, you're going to be sacked if you say that again." And then they get signed, kind of bizarrely, through an appearance on the Channel 4 program, The Tube, by somebody who sort of overwrote, who sort of said, "Look, I'm going to sign them," even though, because he was high enough. Did you ever have any bands that you kind of wished you'd signed that you didn't during that period? Because there was a lot of rock bands, weren't there? Or was there ever pressure not to sign a band?
No, no, never pressure to not sign a band, but uh, no, it's interesting because just about every band I signed, if you like, or was involved in, I never had any competition. They were, I mean, one band in particular, which was, I don't know whether they're frowned, whatever it is. They had an album they did themselves from out of Vancouver, Canada, and they couldn't even get a deal in Canada. And the album was The State, and the band was Nickelback.
Oh, yes.
And I heard the song "Leader of Men." One of my A&R guys brought it to me, and I thought, this is really great. I mean, I thought, who's this? Chad Kroger, and I mean, this is a really great track. I mean, who is this band? And I got speaking. I met the band, and I talked to a couple in Canada, and again, no one would touch them. No one wanted to sign them, and they did their own album. And so I had a feeling. I just want they had a sound that was completely different to. I mean, it was incredibly melodic. It fitted, so perfectly into a world which is into the grunge at that time. It was a whole different thing. So I brought them down to New York and signed them to a very cheap deal. This album came out the state, and Leader of Men became a pretty big hit. And then the next album came out, Silver Side Up. And when I heard How You Remind Me,
Oh, right.
I had this exact same feeling as when I heard Living on a Prayer. I
Yes.
knew I knew it was going to be massive.
Yes, it did. It did.
Uh,
So it was everywhere, wasn't it? How
yeah,
you remind me. It was a classic. Were you with Roadrunner at this stage then? Had
yeah,
you
I was writing Roadrunner at that time. Yeah.
right? Was that a big decision to leave Polygram and go to
Well, I went on to
Roadrunner?
I went on to ATCO for after Polygram, and
Right.
I signed Pantera, Dream Theater. I worked with AC/DC, getting them back on their feet. By a bad company. I've been tons of things. I can't remember anymore. Uh,
Yes.
so
Amazing.
yeah, a lot of stuff. I've been, and then I went on to be president of Roadrunner, which suited me better because it wasn't somewhere where it was a corporate environment, which I eventually started to hate, and it was a fantastic period. And
Yes.
then they went through some issues financially, which stymied my ability to do what I wanted to do. And I came to the owner of the label, and I came to decisions that I really couldn't carry on without having the finances to do what I wanted to do. So that was it. And now I'm working with the catalog of Gentle Giant, and I'm also now in the studio again. And and reflecting back on, we've talked through a lot of stuff here. Reflecting back on my many decades of being involved in the music business and being a musician,
Mhm.
and I'm in the studio again. Um, I mentioned in a glass house, and that was the only album. We've had a lot of remixes, as you probably know, by Stephen
Yes.
Wilson, and we have one out right now from of the Playing the Fool, which is really a spectacular remix and reimagined version. But now I'm working in on In a Glass House, which was the only album that we were not able to find the multi tracks. They were gone. They were burnt or something like that. So no one could remix them. Stephen Wilson initially came to us and said, "I want to mix that one first," and we didn't have the tracks. I mean, they were gone. But I'm in the studio now with a really fantastic engineer, and I'm using the really highest end AI to separate the tracks and make this album the way I think we would have liked it back in the day. And
Right.
it sounds unbelievable. And it kind of put me back into a situation that I'm looking back now and thinking and listening to In a Glass House and thinking, well, this is really me. This is not, I'm telling you about all these other bands that I signed and was
Yes.
lucky enough to make it, make a good living, if you like. But really, um, being a musician and writing the music, and I listened to it. I was in the studio yesterday, and listening to it, thinking, "Damn, I was really good. We were really good."
Well, yes, it's lovely to sort of complete. I wouldn't say complete the circle, but to sort of come back and reappraise, but also just really acknowledge that. I think is quite an important thing because I think with a lot of bands, they sometimes don't always have a great experience. It doesn't end well, but actually, one day it could do them emotionally a lot of good to kind of think, yeah, there was some great songs we wrote and there was some great moments, but you have
Right.
to sort of, it comes with certain damage, doesn't it, really, and a lot of heightened emotion. But would you want to trade it for anything else? This is all.
Exactly. Right. No, we
No.
had it was an incredible. I've had an incredible life of being involved in music and musicians and even the business, and the crazy world. And in fact, you can read about it in my book, which is coming out in September.
Oh, excellent. I'm so pleased. So then the live album, Playing the Fool, when did this, because this came out 77, Silver Jubilee. Was this something that you had been thinking we really need to also sort of, I don't know, brighten it up, remix it, remaster it? Was it a project that you'd been thinking about for quite a while?
Yeah, actually, because we remixed several albums prior to that with Stephen and Wilson. Actually, had been remixed for us. And Stephen's a friend and almost a member of the band. But on this album, we asked him, and he said it's difficult because it's not just one album. It was four. We recorded this album in four different places in Europe during a European tour. It was Munich, Dusseldorf, Belgium, and Paris. And so it was difficult for him. But we had a friend and an archivist called Dan Bornemark in Sweden, and he did a spectacular job in literally taking every reel of tape we had, and he had an idea for us to say, instead of just remixing what we had in 1977, why don't you do an album which is your stage show, literally from beginning to end. Because we weren't able to put several songs on the album because there's only so much room on vinyl in those days to do a double album.
Right.
So we had to leave off some music and a couple of tracks and raise an incredible violin solo. So we said, what a great idea. So he put together, using all the multis that we had, this album, which is called "Playing the Fool," but it's reimagined and remixed, and you could hear. Uh, it's. I mean, if you hear it on 5.1, especially in Atmos, it's like being at a Gentle Giant concert in 1976, 77. It's when we were playing at our very best. I really believe that, and we were at our most, I guess, popular period of time. We were playing really big venues. We were playing at, 20,000 seaters in certain places, and we were playing really, really well. So it was a great time to sort of like put our stamp on a live album. And so when he said, like, do the show as it was, we said, what a great idea. So we now have
Yes.
it was a reimagined and remixed and the version of Gentle Giant if you went to see them in 1977.
This is it. This is just hit play, hit the intro, and then wait until you get to the end of Peel the Paint and I Lost My Head. God, this is such a
Exactly that.
great and it's beautifully packaged. I have to say, it looks
Thank you.
gorgeous. I mean, you must be really pleased. And then, which we all love as fans, is you've written the book.
Yes, I have. And
When did this project start?
about 3 or 4 years ago or longer. I've told you stories, but in between these facts, the stories in between these facts
Yes.
are sometimes hilarious and sometimes tragic, but also sometimes extremely funny. So having had the many years of being around musicians and also being around the executive world and stories which you'll read in the book are going to be, I think they're interesting. I like it. I think it's quite good, so I hope other people do.
Oh God, it would be fantastic. I must admit, I think there was a book by the guy from the Chrysalis Records that came out, I don't know, probably 5 years ago. I can't remember his name, but yes, I mean, us fans, this is what we love, and these little kind of, especially crossovers, like you said, and you've obviously had quite a few chapters from your 60s, your 70s, your 80s, and different worlds, which is like, God, that's
Yeah.
an amazing life lived. And I guess, do you also find during that process a sense of being able to kind of go back and sort of reprocess stuff yourself, or sort of think about it and just kind of put it into some context of what happened then and how you feel about it, and then sometimes put things to bed?
Actually, yes, that's a great question. In fact, as I said, I'm in the studio now and mixing in a glass house, and I'll say I'll say honestly, when I was listening to what one of the, I think it was Way of Life, and when we finished it, um, tears were rolling down my eyes, and I realized that my life was full of music, but what was more important than anything else for me was being a musician and creating, and that really brought it home. That was that's the book is called Giant Steps, and at the end of the book, I say to the people that read it, and hopefully will read it in the future. This was really my giant step, that I realized this is who I was. I was a musician, and all the other stuff that I did in between. The fun that we had with Bon Jovi or Pantera, whatever. Oh, they were great, but really, ultimately, music and being a musician and creative and creating things was really who I am, and I'm just that's who I am, and that's part of what my life was about.
Yes, because I always remember a rather sweet moment with Robert Plant when the band, Led Zeppelin finished. He said that was, and John Bonham had died. He said that was the end of innocence for him. Did you ever feel that a little bit with Gentle Giant? Did you feel that that period was a kind of not a complete innocence, but there was like, wow, that was a nice time where I was just able to do what I wanted to, living in Portsmouth with this gang making music, and then suddenly it's kind of over, and then you realise you're not quite going to be able to be that same person again, or be that same person all the time. You're going to have to put on a different suit occasionally, or different period of
Yeah,
shirt.
well, it was a chapter, and different. Your life does have chapters, and the many people over the years, if you like, and the fact that Gentle Giant's music it still appears to be vital and still appears to have a life of its own still, which is amazing to me because the last album was made in 1980. Here we are in 2025,
I know.
and the music still is almost as popular, if not more popular, than it used to be, which says a lot. I mean, it's gratifying that, and I won't say. Well, I will say it has some kind of. I think we've left a legacy, and I'm happy that young people are listening to the music we made and are able and enjoy what we did, because we didn't know what we were doing at the time, but we knew it was good, And when I'm listening to the you just mentioned the live album, when I heard it in 5.1, um, again, coming from a person who's been involved in the music business and run companies and everything else, I listened to it and I thought, damn, we were really great. I would sign that band.
Excellent. That's a good thing, isn't it? Yes. But also, I guess with after a decade or nearly a decade of playing, you probably could hear that you were really on the same wavelength, and you couldn't just go back and recreate that if you
Oh
tried.
no,
But
no! You mean getting together and
yeah, I mean, they're never good ideas. But you kind of realize that you're listening to each other. You're absolutely, you're playing every night, probably every day,
right, right.
and to be that finely tuned as a band, and individuals within a group. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. We would never want to, years later, reform, if you like. And number one, I couldn't get it to the clothes I got into. I'd have to get a seamstress. And number two, a wheelchair would be good, and oxygen also. But no,
palpable.
we never want to be a parody or self tribute band. That would be awful. I mean, that for all of us. I mean, that's something that would be, it's just creepy to me.
Yes, a bit too. Yes, I think there's one thing if a band never breaks up and they're doing it, but I think it's kind of a bit
Yeah,
strange when it's like a bit different. But look, Derek, thank you ever so much for this. This has been amazing to hear this, your story. Actually, I'm really looking forward to the book now because obviously for the Christmas market, it's always good, isn't it? And yeah, and did you with the? I mean, did you find lots of fantastic photographs and bits of memorabilia to add
oh
in?
yeah. No, there's lots of stuff there, and there are lots of pictures and lots of interesting things in it. Yep,
God, that's going to be fantastic. Well, we'll look forward, and thank you ever so much for your time. I really appreciate this, and
it's my pleasure.
I'll let you get on for your evening. I'll go to bed now. Okay, thanks a lot, Derek.
My pleasure.
Take care. Bye bye.
You
Bye
too.
bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. You probably gathered that. A massive thank you to Derek for giving me, time for doing this. And also, yes, I'll put a link in the notes below if you want to go to the website to find out more about the band and his live. Also, this is the C86 show, David Eastaugh. So if you want to contact me, you can on all those social media platform sites. And yes, I've done all these interviews, and you can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. Check them out. Have a great week. Stay safe.